I'll call to order the Parks and Recreation Commission meeting for February 25th, and we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance. Doraka, you want to lead us?
Ready? Pledge. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, Ms. McGill.
Chair Longstreet.
Here.
Vice Chair Larimore Hall.
Here.
Connor.
Here.
Burns. Here. Hockman.
Here.
Intern Torres Santos.
Here.
Thank you. Ms. Rapp, are there any changes to the agenda?
No, Chair.
Written communications? I don't believe we have any. Public comment. Any member of the public may address the Commission for up to 1 minute on any subject within the jurisdiction of the Commission that is not scheduled for a public discussion before the Commission.
So we have two public comment slips that do not indicate an agenda item number. So the first is from Chuck Rose. Is that for an item that is not on the agenda?
Yeah.
Correct, and then it would be timely now. Thanks.
Here at Santa Barbara Pony Baseball. Thought you might like some good news in this day of darkness. 2 weeks from Saturday is our opening day. Mackenzie Park, 9 a.m. I gave Miss Rapp and Miss Longstreet copies of the invitation. You're certainly all invited. In spite of the economy, we're up 5% over a year ago. We're working with, of course, the City of Santa Barbara Parks and Recreation. Your staff's been great. It's not adversarial. We're all working together. We're also partnered with the Police Activities League and work in concert with the Feelings Park Foundation, Goleta Valley South Little League, along with DP Little League. Get them playing, get them off the streets. We don't care where. Opening day, it's celebrities, first pitch, introductions, games, raffles, barbecue. It's just a fun day, and we hope that each and every one of you and your families will come out and join us and see what the kids can be.
Thank you.
I hope you, again, it's March 14th, 9 a.m. at Mackenzie.
Yeah.
Do you have any questions?
No, just I would like to say that, especially in these times when the economics are getting worse, having partners like Pony Baseball enable these programs to be available to all kids. And so thank you very much for all the work you do to make sure that our kids in our community are taken care of.
That's a whole lot of people, and it's our 35th year, and we're not going anywhere.
Well, we appreciate every one of them. Thank you.
Thank you kindly, and hope to see you 2 weeks from Saturday.
Chair Longstreet and Commissioners, just to add a bit to what Mr. Rose said, Pony Baseball is probably the longest co-sponsorship partnership relationship that we have with a community organization in this department, and it has been a great relationship over the years, and they have every year invested their time and efforts in investing in capital improvements in the various facilities that they use. And that's our trade-off for the access that they have for our fields. And it's always been a great relationship. Our parks manager, Santos Escobar, works very closely with Pony to identify park improvements that benefit the park and improve it as a baseball facility, and so we really appreciate that. And I especially want to acknowledge Pony Baseball, and even though Mr. Rose talked about it, they really have done a substantial job in the last couple years in expanding their participation and doing outreach into the various neighborhoods and communities and working with the Police Activities League, as he said. They've really been doing a great job, so we're really pleased to partner with you. Thank you.
Our pleasure, and thanks for the comment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
At this time, just for members of the audience, if you would like to speak to an issue, make sure you fill out a white form and put the item number. And Ms. Perry, 3D, right? 3C1. Okay, got it. My mistake. Thank you. Okay, seeing no further public comment, we'll move to community service recognition.
And Chair Longstreet, we do not have a particular community service recognition this month, so we'll look to having that next month.
Okay, thank you very much. Commissioner Committee assignment reports. Do we have any reports from the Commission? Mr. Burns.
I attended my first teen council meeting on Monday. One quick comment is that on March 17th, they were going to have the second anniversary of the 1235 building, where we will all, I assume, get more formal invitations, but they would like us to attend.
Thank you.
That's my report.
Thank you. Anyone else? Well, I attended West Beach Art, and that is moving forward and going through the various other commissions for approval. We will be continuing to meet on that and make progress. And Ms. Rapp and I attended the CPRS Commissioners Workshop up at Hearst Castle, San Simeon, last weekend, and it was a very worthwhile morning to spend in that the main topic was advocacy and the role of boards and commissions in advocating for parks and recreation facilities and programs within our communities, and ideas of ways to advocate. And I think oftentimes I think of advocating as asking for money. Sometimes that's what it translates to me. And in these times, advocating maybe even broader than that. And we really need to get the community support behind what we do and what we know is important to our community. And it's going to be up to each and every one of us to put the good word out in the community about our parks, the programs, to get people thinking about the times they use the facilities that we have, that they don't sometimes even identify what a difference that makes to the quality of their life. So I'm sure Ms. Rapp will have much more to add, but it was a great morning. And we got to go to Piedras Blancas Lighthouse and take a very interesting tour and see the elephant seals. So.
Just to add a couple of comments, the California Park and Recreation Society is the professional association for Parks and Recreation in the state of California, and one of the presenters at the workshop is the executive director of that organization, and she shared with us that the organization had recently taken on an extensive survey of California, how Californians value parks and recreation, and this is the first such effort to take place in the country. And so the information that is being gleaned from this marketing outreach is being shared with other communities as well. So two things that came out of it that were most impressive was that 98% of Californians visit parks, which is a very, very big number, and that 50% of Californians participate in or have participated in recreation programs. And I think as we are, that's important information for us as we are facing challenging budgetary times and thinking about, if that's reflective of our own community, then we need to be making our priorities fit that statistic. So that was very interesting, and certainly the discussion with the panel, which had commissioners from the state level, commissioners from a local level. There was a city council person, and then a Parks and Recreation director. all talking about advocacy and how to be an effective advocate at those different levels of organizations, especially locally, and a couple of really great examples of just how you do it on a daily basis. Someone shared that they were standing at an event and had the opportunity to speak to a state legislator and point out that the event was taking place in a park and wasn't that great. And, you know, things that we take for granted, but reminding people of all the roles that our community parks play. So it was a very good workshop, very informative, and I think in the future, if we have the opportunity to have more commissioners attend, it does make a long day because we drive up and come back in one day. But it's very worthwhile. An opportunity to interact and talk with commissioners from other communities is very valuable.
Thank you. Okay, well, that brings us to commission and staff communications. And do we have any? None? Then we will move on to our youth council report.
Okay. Well, there's not too much. What we just been discussing was that we're mainly talking about the anniversary that's coming up, as Mr. Burns stated. He came to the first meeting and we welcomed him, and all the youth council members got to introduce themselves, and we welcomed Mr. Burns. But the main thing that is, like, I'll be talking about the next report is about the teen center anniversary, and that's going to be a week-long process thing that they're going to have activities there, and they're going to just like they're looking forward to maybe trying to, like, one of the rooms they want to make it remodeled. Was it the music center place, and they wanted to make it girls friendly a little bit, but I'll have more information on that next week. But that's about it.
Thank you.
For those of you with busy schedules, if you want to put this on your schedule, the ceremony will be at 5 o'clock on March 17th at the Teen Center, and that will be the official ceremony with cake cutting, and it will take place at the Teen Center itself.
Okay. Thank you. We have the consent calendar with the summary of council actions.
Actually, Chair Longstreet, I have a question about the one item on the summary of council actions. I'm wondering if there's an accounting of what parks facility projects that money was redirected to.
Yes, actually, the funding, if I can remember from helping to draft the council report, the actual funding for the main project was to go towards the Franklin renovation. And we came in under budget, and we had about $98,000 in remaining funds. And so we went to council asking them to authorize that those funds be redirected to completing some additional improvements at the Franklin Center with lighting and some other things. And I'm sorry, I can't remember all the specific things. A new roof for the Haley Street Youth Center, which is the Primo boxing facility. So if you've driven by and seen how sad that looks, we all know that will be appreciated. And I think the other improvements were at the West Side Center. I can't remember exactly, but they were, in order for these funds to be used, it had to be in neighborhoods that would qualify for CDBG funding projects. So the money went to those projects. It was Ortega Welcome House. Thank you.
All worthy projects.
Thank you.
Okay. And approval of minutes. Let's start with the December 17th minutes. And I think you were the only one here.
I move to waive the reading and accept the December 17th minutes.
And I'll second that. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
Yes.
Okay. One abstention. Okay, and January 28th minutes. All had time to review those.
Move to waive reading and approve the minutes.
Second?
Okay. All those in favor, is there any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions?
One.
One abstention. And that brings us to the street tree advisory items. So we will start with item 3A, 202 La Jolla Drive.
Chair Longstreet and Commissioners, I've prepared a PowerPoint presentation showing the trees just for clarity. 202 La Jolla Drive is a African fern pine. The request to remove the tree was due to sidewalk damage. The tree otherwise is healthy and can be assessed for safety while the sidewalk repairs are made. Therefore, the Street Advisory Committee and staff recommend the removal be denied.
Okay, are there any questions for staff? Motion?
I have a question. I'm sorry.
Yes, sir.
If the tree is assessed for safety during the sidewalk repairs and is then found to be unsafe, does that affect future sidewalk repairs, or if there is then a tree removal due to unsafety, does the sidewalk get messed up again? Or?
Chair Longstreet, Commissioner Huckman, the typical situation, the street division makes repairs to the sidewalks on their schedule. When they get to a site and open the site up and there's tree roots involved, they call our staff out to assist with pruning roots and make a determination about the safety of the tree. If the sidewalk can't be put back without harming the tree, then we will remove the tree for safety reasons.
Thank you. I understand now.
And just for our new commissioners, when there is a safety issue, it goes to staff only, really. It's handled in an emergency fashion. So we usually don't even see those again. Okay, so do we have a motion on 3A1?
I move that we take staff's recommendation and deny the removal of 202 La Jolla.
Second.
Okay, and I would just say that we're taking the Street Tree Advisory Committee recommendation is all, so that it's not really just staff here. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, and that brings us to B, the approvals. Mr. Danny, why don't you go through all the approvals, and then we can maybe do this one in one motion, but you can do your whole presentation at once.
Chair Longstreet, I will just advise when we get to 920 Summit, a member of Montecito Country Club is here to answer questions if you choose.
Okay, then let's do them separately then. If we have a member of the public here, we'll do them separately.
If it pleases you, we can do item B1 and 2 and then stop to
Okay.
do B3.
Let's do it that way.
517 Alameda Padre Serra is a Coast Live Oak. The property accesses their garage from an alley behind the home. In that situation, the alleyway becomes the front setback, and that's why we're reviewing this one. The reasons for removing this tree were that it hangs over the public alley, and it was destroying the wall, and they were concerned about safety of the tree. Street Tree Advisory Committee and staff determined the tree is likely to fall into the alley if left in place, and the removal of this tree would benefit adjacent trees. Therefore, Street Tree Advisory Committee and staff recommend this be approved. B2, 416 and 418 Montgomery Street is a giant yucca. The reasons were concern about invasive root system competing with more desirable trees. Street Tree Advisory Committee and staff determined the tree is too close to the public sidewalk and the adjacent driveway, and determined that as the tree grows larger, it will damage those facilities. For those reasons, in addition to the reason that removal of this tree will benefit adjacent trees, Street Tree Advisory Committee and staff recommend it be approved.
Okay, are there any questions for staff? A motion.
I'd like to make a motion that item B1 and 2, we approve the setback tree removals as recommended by the advisory committee.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, now we are to 920 Summit Road.
Chair Longstreet and Commissioners, the 920 Summit Road is Montecito Country Club. They are proposing a large project to renovate the entire golf course, which will consist of realigning holes and significant grading. By agreement, the property has a 100-foot setback, and so we'll be reviewing trees that are in that setback along Old Coast Highway. The desire is to regrade portions of the golf course to redirect water flow so that it doesn't flow off of the golf course. It is directed to a drainage system instead. The grading will end up causing the death of these trees, either by uprooting them or burying them and causing them to die from being buried too deeply. The project overall is planting 422 trees on the project. In addition, the trees in the setback, the replacements well outnumber the proposed removals. Due to the grading issues, the Street Tree Advisory Committee and staff recommend that these trees be approved.
Okay. Did we have any questions for the country club representative? I will say that I have seen portions of this project on, I think it was before HLC, and I know it has undergone extensive landscape review. And although this is a loss of 17 trees, I did drive by today. I don't believe, I think it's going to be a beautiful project when it's done, and there's a great benefit to the community to not have all that water sheeting off of there. So, questions, motion? Don't all rush to the mic here.
I will make a motion to approve with the Street Advisory Committee. This is, I've already lost the number here. This project, 920 Summit Street, I move we approve it.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay. 1021 St. Andrews Street.
Chair Longstreet and Commissioners, 1021 San Andres Street has another African fern pine. The tree is located less than 1 foot from the corner of the building. The reasons were due to construction for the golf course, excuse me, I'm wrong item, damage to the building, excuse me. Upon visiting the site, the Street Tree Advisory Committee staff noted there had been some repairs to the exterior stucco that indicated there was likely damage. We did not see any other signs of damage. The tree, however, cannot be root pruned and maintain safety or assure stopping any future damage. Therefore, the Street Tree Advisory Committee and staff recommend the tree be approved for removal.
Is there a replacement proposed, or is there room
There's
for
not
a
a
replacement?
replacement proposed. There are other trees in the front of that property that will more than shade that section.
Good thought. I think the other thought is don't plant those little pine trees that you think are so cute in your front yard. Is there a
The
motion?
tree version of the pet alligator.
Yeah.
Move concurrence with staff and advisory committee for approval of removing the tree, 1021 San Andreas Street.
Second.
Okay, discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, this brings us to 3C1, 617 Bradbury Avenue, and we do have two speakers for this item.
Chair Longstreet and Commissioners, 617 Bradbury Avenue is a very tall Canary Island date palm. The reasons expressed were danger to public safety and that it was not compatible with other trees on the street or the scale of the proposed project. The tree is about 80 foot tall, and in looking at several references for this tree, it stated that it can get to be 60 feet tall. The staff determined that given the extraordinary size of this tree, this tree is a rare specimen and should be preserved. The tree has not been given that designation by City Council, however. On Monday, February 23rd, ABR, Architectural Board of Review, reviewed the project under a second consent item and commented on this tree. The motion that was made, a portion of the motion that was made was a majority of the board believes the project can move forward no matter what the decision for this palm. Street Tree Advisory Committee and staff determined the hazard can be mitigated through pruning. Street Tree Advisory Committee staff determined the tree is a skyline tree and therefore an asset to the community and recommend the removal be denied.
Okay. Our first speaker is Robert Livernoy. And Mr. Livernoy will be followed by Fay Perry.
Robert Livernoy, and thank you for allowing me to come. I'd like to see the Canariensis left. I do agree with everyone about the fact that it hasn't had significant pruning to take back the fronds that have been cut off like that. So with some pruning, and at the bottom, if there can be pruning, I think it's very significant. Now, I left a few pictures. I don't know if you, because you see it from the Paseo Nuevo garage, you see it. I took pictures very far out, and we have a lot of pictures of it close as well. But I do think it's an important tree, and unless there's some real peril, I know, of course, the lower branches have to be, the dead ones, when they die, they have to be cut, but that isn't every year. You can let a little bit of that, the fronds stay. So I don't know, unless it's absolutely impossible to, it appears to be on the lot in a place that if with careful excavation for the proposed building, it would not necessarily be hurt by the. So that's about it. I think it's kind of a nifty tree, and I think you sort of saw pictures from so many angles where it is important. You look at, there's the frizzy paint. It shows from Chapala and puts a better scale on the big building. The frizzy paint building is dwarfed by this tree, and that's a help, and because it has a rather high line. Well, I hope you will consider
Thank
keeping
you.
the tree.
Thank you. Ms. Perry?
Thank you. I'm Fay Perry. I'm one of the owners of the 617 Bradbury property. I purchased this property in about July of '07. At that time, it was filled with trash, discarded furniture, sofas, bikes, overrun with unregistered vehicles, disabled vehicles. It was a property with substantial file of police activity and zoning violations, including running of a meth lab over there. And I proceeded to clean up the lot with this tiny 400-square-foot single-family residence at the rear of the property. I contacted Tim Downey, our urban forester, about the palm tree in an effort to find out what could be done with this palm tree as far as removal, because it has a number of very large fronds that are very dangerous, extremely large, and it has a tilt to the neighbor to the right side. I was told that I needed to apply for a license to remove it, which I did, and upon receiving that license, Mr. Downey called me and then reconfirmed in an email that the tree was not on city property, and because it was on a completely C2 zone street, that I did not need a license to remove it. He did encourage me to try to find someone to donate the tree to, and I tried very diligently to do that, including offering it to the city. Didn't get any takers. I tried a second time, a flurry of emails and telephone contacts. That didn't work. And so on Mr. Downey's written authorization by email, I proceeded to let a contract to remove the tree. As soon as the crew came out there to do that, Mr. Downey was summoned by a neighbor, and the work was stopped. And I was told at that time that because there was going to be plans in the future, which we had not on the board at that time, but plans in the future to develop this property, that I had to stop work and we could not proceed with the removal of the tree. One of the main problems with the tree, obviously, is the danger to the public, because there are extremely large fronds. Because of its height, it takes special, very expensive equipment to get up there to even try to get to the tree. And I think the thing that you're not seeing is what that tree looks like when you're on the property. You can't see the tree, first of all, and what you can see of the tree is a very large, pretty bad-looking portion of the lower part of that tree. And it would be a financial burden to me as the owner of the property to try to maintain that in any sense of the word. We have planned a mixed-use development around the tree in the event that the ABR or your street committee does not want to have the tree removed. However, it's going to take up a majority of what would be the outdoor living space, and we have planned a much more in-scale tree, which would be a Japanese maple, I believe it is. It's kind of a red-looking tree, to replace this particular tree and make that more attractive to the whole neighborhood. I mean, and that's about what I have. If the city or Mr. Livermore would like to trim that tree up at their expense, I would certainly agree to do that, but it's a burden.
Thank you. Mr. Downey, do you want to talk a little about the zoning issue here, please?
Chair Longstreet and Commissioners, the property is Zone C2. Community Development Planning Division, in reviewing the project, wanted to treat this as an R3, R4 because of neighboring properties and the uses of those properties. Therefore, they're treating it as R3, R4, which is a 10-foot setback, and that's why it's here today.
Okay. Does the Commission have any questions regarding this? I did watch ABR today. The tree can remain and the project can go forward, and there was feelings among some members of ABR that this tree needs to be saved. So that's sort of, I mean, I did try to pay attention to the auxiliary issues around this tree, trying to figure out this zoning issue, because it is a little complicated, and I do understand the frustration of being caught in something like that. I did a site visit to the tree. It's gorgeous. It's not gorgeous when you're standing next to it, and I understand that, but that isn't the only way we view trees in this community. So other comments or questions of staff?
I guess I would just like to get my head a little bit more around the zoning issues here. If this was treated as a C2, then we would not have jurisdiction over the setback because the setback threshold is shorter on commercial than on residential. Is that correct?
Chair Longstreet, Commissioner Larimer Hall, the zoning C2 is a zero setback.
Zero setback. Okay. So definitely. So that I guess given the use of, so we're in a kind of gray area or like a border area between different kinds of zones. And so, but what body within the city is the recommendation of treating this as R3, R4 coming from?
The Community Development Planning Division.
Okay. So I guess I'm always happy to save a tree in a setback, and I wish that our setbacks for commercial properties was higher than zero for that very reason. But I am a little bit, I'm wondering how this plays out if the property owner is adamant about being able to remove this tree. And maybe, I realize I may not be asking exactly the right person that question, so I'm just, anything that you know or that Chair Longstreet knows would be helpful.
I think it has to do with the project proposed, because the project is proposed mixed use. If the project went forward as a commercial project, it would be a different, we'd be looking at it we wouldn't be looking at it. But it's going forward as a mixed use, so it has a residential component to it, thereby allowing them to do that. Is that
Chair Longstreet, in addition to that, the current only building on the property is a residential building as well.
Let me make a couple of comments. I took a site visit yesterday and then thought about it and went back and looked at it this afternoon. My feelings are, because I think I'm going to be disagreeing with staff on this and the Tree Advisory Committee, because it basically, the front of the building is the back of two commercial structures. I mean, it is a residential area, but it's really a commercial area. It's a huge tree, and it would be a great tree in a location that it could be viewed by people. It just seems a little out of place if they're planning to put another tree in its place that will be similar size with some of the other trees that are on the street. That's where I would be in favor of that. So give you guys my view.
Thank you.
I have a question also, and I want to go back to a timeline, which is when you were called out to stop the original removal of the tree, and I believe that the speaker, the owner, Ms. Perry, said that there was no plan on the books at that point, but even so, the removal was stopped, and I'm wondering how that is valid if the property was then C2 and was being treated as C2. How does that tree removal be stopped?
Chair Longstreet, Commissioner Huckman, there's an ordinance on the books that says that when you're going to develop a property, you need to indicate any trees on the plan. When I went out to the site, I urged them to stop. I did not demand they stop for that reason.
As a follow-up, but they did or did not have a plan to redevelop at that point?
I was unaware of whether there was any plans on the books or not.
Right. Okay. So I'm just trying to put this together. Had they continued with the removal at that point, would there have been any issues or problems?
They still would have had to indicate any trees on the property for the prior 2 years when they put in their proposal. Had they not done that, there would have been an issue, but no. Other than that, there would not have been an issue.
So they could have removed the tree, submitted plans that had an indication that there used to be a tree at that point, and assumedly put some other kind of tree, maybe this maple or something else in a future plan, and we wouldn't be here discussing denying the removal of a tree that was already removed legally. Is that what I'm hearing?
That would be correct.
Well, What is the pleasure of the commission? I would entertain a motion.
Point of order, Madam Chair. What happens if we don't make a motion on this? Is a motion needed in the affirmative to concur, or if we do not make a motion, then does this go someplace else? Does
No,
it just
we're it.
anything?
This is our, yeah.
Well, I understand, but if we actually don't speak onto it, what happens to it?
I don't know. I guess I don't see that as an option for us. If we deny the removal, the applicant has 10 days to appeal our decision to City Council. All of our decisions are appealable. Our options are to approve removal based on ABR's recommendations at the final approval of their building plans, deny removal, all of those things. If we deny removal, they can't come back to us for a year? Is it
1
a year?
year is the time limit, yes.
1 year.
Well, the issue that I'm having is that I'm not of good conscience to deny the removal based on the timeline issue. However, I'm not also of a mind to vote to approve removal. I think it's kind of instead of being a tree issue, it's sort of, to me, turned into a legal or some other kind of development issue that I don't know this commission has purview over. In other words, how did the tree not get removed before legally when evidently it could have?
At that point in time, the reason that I understand it, that Mr. Downing was called out, is the property, although commercial, was being used residential. That's the only use of that property at that point. So that's what community development backed at the residential aspect of it.
Well, I understand
Yeah.
that, but based on my questions, that isn't the answer that we got. What we got is that it was C2 then, and that the tree could have been removed legally then, and we wouldn't be here had that happened.
Okay, Mr.
Yeah, I have to say I'm somewhat sympathetic with where my fellow commissioner is coming from, but my experience working with Mr. Downey and working with the staff is that if Mr. Downey says that he advised that the tree not be removed, did not order that it not be removed, I'm very much inclined to believe that. And even if it is true, or there is this irony in the situation or something, that the tree could have been removed as a fait accompli and we wouldn't be dealing with it right now, that may be true. Still, the fact is, as confused as the timeline may be, because we have this zoning issue, what's before us right now is whether or not we're going to approve removal of the tree, and I'm certainly inclined to concur with the Street Tree Advisory Committee's recommendation and deny removal. But I want to make sure that there's a full discussion before I make a motion to that effect.
And I would have to say this is a beautiful specimen tree, and once it's gone, it's gone. And I fully empathize with the applicant in that it is hard to own a specimen tree, but that specimen tree was on that property for many, many years and came with it when it was purchased. And to lose it is a value to it hurts the community as a whole. So I would have to concur with the Street Tree Advisory Committee.
I'd like to make a motion to deny the setback tree removal for 617 Bradbury as recommended by the Street Tree Advisory Committee.
Second.
Any more discussion? All those in...
Yeah, I also want to just be on the record saying that, obviously, as we move towards, if we are moving towards this, but as we move towards more mixed-use development and so forth, there's certainly going to be more and more of these kinds of zoning issues that are going to come up. And so I'd like to be on the record passing on to the powers that be that, clearer guidelines as well as, public education to property owners that are planning to develop in that way, which I think is a very good thing, about all of the implications that that'll mean for land use, for trees, et cetera, will certainly be very helpful and make our jobs a lot easier.
Well, we have a motion on the floor. Any other discussion? Okay. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
No.
Okay, 3-2. And as I said, any of our decisions are appealable within 10 days to City Council. That brings us to 3D street tree master plan changes.
Mayor Longstreet and Commissioners, the 2400 block of Calle Galicia, does not have any designated trees at this point. We got a call requesting trees be planted, so that's why it's come to you for a decision. The existing trees on the street are a mixture of Melaleuca trees and Brazilian pepper trees. Based on the size of the parkways and the existing species in the area, Street Advisory Committee and staff determined it would be appropriate to choose 2 trees for this section based on the wide variety of trees. Street Advisory Committee and staff therefore recommend prickly leaf paperbark and cajeput tree for adoption.
Just out of curiosity, I don't ever recall seeing a cajeput tree before. What is the height on that tree? It looks beautiful.
In Santa Barbara, it can get to be 45, 50 feet.
Good. Good. Okay. Questions of staff?
How flammable are those trees?
They are not listed on the high fire danger trees.
Even better. Okay. Is there a motion for this street tree master plan change?
I move to concur with the Street Tree Advisory Committee's recommendation for designation of street trees as amended to the master plan.
Okay, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously. Okay.
Chair Longstreet, Adair Drive is a cul-de-sac off of San Remo. The current designated species is purple leaf plum, as you see on the left. The existing profile is 2 purple leaf plums, 2 queen palms, and 1 jacaranda. The parkways are small and would require a small tree. The San Remo Street, adjacent to this cul-de-sac, has the designated species of purple leaf plum as well. The purple leaf plums in the area are succumbing to a disease called fire blight, which rose family plants can get when they slow down their growth patterns. The purple leaf plum is highly susceptible to that. The person who requested the change recently had 2 purple leaf plums die of that disease in front of his home. The Street Tree Advisory Committee and staff determined that the forest pansy redbud, shown in the 2 photographs on the right, resemble the purple leaf plum and is not susceptible to the disease, so it would fit in quite well with the palette, and therefore recommend adoption of forest pansy redbud.
Okay. Discussion? Motion?
Just a question. Are there other trees that are in the area, in the city, that have the same potential fire blight, and are we doing anything proactive about it?
Chair Longstreet and Commissioners, the fire blight is an opportunistic disease that is not very treatable. The disease spreads by insects and by, if it's raining when the plant is blooming, then it splashes the disease onto the new flowers. It causes dieback of the tree and kills the cambium, causing the tree to continue to die back. There are some there's some research that shows a little bit of effect of antibiotic sprays, but this being a community that is sustainable, we attempt not to make treatments whenever possible. And given their questionable effectiveness, it wouldn't be advisable to do that.
Okay.
All right. I'll move concurrence with staff and advisory committee regarding a change to the species designation 200 block Adair Drive.
Second.
All right. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay. Ms. Rapp, is this Mr. Namnath? Could we move him up and do your interview now? Oh, okay. Well, we're done with trees now. We're going to do Parma Park, and it's going to be interesting, and you're welcome to stay. But if you'd like to come forward, we would go to 6A, the interview of Dominic Namnath for appointment to the Golf Advisory Committee. Welcome. Did you want to tell us a little about what involvement you may have had with Golf Advisory so far? Or?
I've had no involvement, actually. The president of the men's club, Matt Free, asked if I would like to do this and represent the men's club, and so that's why I'm here.
Oh, that's excellent. I really liked your application. I can manage people, process, and disappointment in all situations. Would you like to come sit up here? I thought that was a great comment.
Yeah, I'm a director of a nonprofit agency here in Santa Barbara, a fairly large one, and we have to balance expectations quite often. So,
I think in the coming years we're all going to be balancing those expectations. Other questions for Mr. Namnath? Any? So have you played at Muni for long, or?
Yes, since I moved to Santa Barbara in 1982. So.
And how are we doing?
Actually, you're doing a great job. I had an opportunity to speak with Cameron at the Creeks project, whatever that is, and had a big discussion with him about the bioswales that they're putting in and the effect of the creeks and Arroyo Burro Beach. And I live right off the beach there, so I'm bookended on both sides of that. And I think it's a lovely project, and I've been watching what's going on at the golf course and how they're managing it. I think they're doing a great job.
Great. Are there any other questions?
Yeah. Thanks for being here and for stepping up. Your application says that you have served on another city committee in the past?
Not on a city committee, on some state projects and things like that, but not...
Oh, okay.
Did I write that on there?
Well, they're both checked for some...
Oh, yes, they are. Interesting. All right.
A moment of indecision.
I mean, I'm on a county disaster planning commission and some state IT projects.
Excellent.
Chair Longstreet, I might just add for the benefit of our newer commissioners that with the Golf Advisory Committee, this is one of the examples where we have specific representation from the various home clubs, which are the clubs that play out of the Santa Barbara Golf Club. And so Mr. Namnath is the representative from the Santa Barbara Men's Golf Club. And so we're happy to have you.
Yes.
It'll be nice to have you on the Golf Advisory Committee.
Well, if there are no further questions, I would entertain a motion for appointment.
Move that we appoint Dominic Namnath to the Golf Advisory Committee.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Welcome aboard, and thank you for volunteering.
Yeah, thank you.
And the paychecks will get sent to my house?
Oh, yeah. You stand by that mailbox and wait.
All right. Thank you very much.
We all do.
I move we double his salary.
Yeah. Okay, we will now go back to...
Actually, Chair Longstreet, if you want to continue with item 6B,
That's a reappointment.
since that's a reappointment and we don't need to have the applicant here.
Do I have a motion to reappoint Bob Griebel?
Yes. So moved.
Okay, moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay. Welcome back, Mr. Griebel. And now to item 4, Parma Park report.
Commission members, this evening we will be giving you a status report on two of our parks that have had a lot of community focus and interest lately because of damage to the park. Parma Park was burned significantly in the Tea Fire. So Ms. Zachary and Mr. Escobar will give you a status report on where we are both for park maintenance and restoration. And then also we have an update for you on Shoreline Park. As you know, we're still in the planning stages of exactly what our options are. So Ms. Zachary will give you an update on that and also talk to you about the neighborhood meeting that she gave a presentation at recently for the Mesa community. Ms. Zachary?
Commissioners, as Ms. Rapp indicated, the intent of today's presentation is to really just to give you a status report. We've been doing quite a few different things at Parma Park and anticipate that this will be a topic on your agenda with some frequency over the next couple of years because of what's happened as a result of the Tea Fire. There's other work that's underway, and once it's further developed, we'll be back with more information. But we wanted to review with you sort of the impact of the Tea Fire at Parma Park. Parma Park is 200 acres. Its main entrance is off Stanwood Drive. It essentially was at the top of the fire area and completely surrounded within the fire area. I've handed you 2 aerial photographs. One shows you, and the copies got a little confused. I apologize for handing them out while you were taking your other item. One shows you the vegetation coverage prior to the fire, and one shows you what Parma Park looked like soon after the fire. And you'll notice how different the park is. Essentially, over 95% of the park burned. We do have some areas, some trees that we anticipate will survive. But we lost an extensive amount of the vegetation, and that is what's brought us to realizing that we have both a challenge and an opportunity to restore this area. Commissioner Burns?
Could you give me approximate dates of the 2 pictures?
Actually, I believe the one with the vegetation came off our data browser, so it might be 2002. And then the latest one, I believe, was given to us that flew over the Tea Fire area, so probably in early December. But I can verify that for you at a future time. But we'd like to talk. Sorry. Okay. We'd like to talk a little bit about our initial response, a little bit about some of the rehabilitation and restoration plan ideas in your staff report includes an attachment that we provided to the Parma Park trustee. For our new commissioners, Parma Park was given to the city, and in, I think, early 2000, I don't have the exact date, that the Parma Park Trust was established, and that trust provides funding to our department for maintenance of Parma Park and is the primary source of funding. We obviously provide support through our staff and our annual budget, but trails work, vegetation fuels work, work that we do on a significant scale that requires contracting, that's paid for by the trust. And so on an annual basis, we put together a work plan. We meet with the trustee. The trustee approves the work plan, and depending on what our fund balance is in our maintenance account and the need for the trust to disperse funds, we receive funding generally on an annual basis, and we report back to the trustee the work that's been completed. So the attachment in your staff report provides you what we provided the trustee when we met with him in late January, and we've developed something more extensive, and it's still under review by the trustee. This gives, what I'd like to show you now are some photographs of the park. It's soon after the Tea Fire was considered mostly over and we could re-enter the area. We took an extensive number of photographs documenting the damage in the park. You can see the photo to the left of the screen, that's actually a creek area. The photo at the top kind of gives you an overview of looking up from a top portion of the park. And then the photo on the bottom right is an example of what's happened to a number of trees. They actually burned right down and were completely destroyed because of the heat of the fire. This gives you some more sense of really what's happening, what happened in Parma Park, and the excuse me, I'm forgetting the word that I want to use. The slopes in Parma Park are extraordinarily steep in most areas, and this gives you a sense of how steep they are. And some of our concerns post-fire were in the event of a significant rainstorm, a lot of that topsoil no longer had anything to keep it in place and would head down one of the many creeks, and you can see from your map a number of creeks that we have that run through the park. Which leads us to, and then again, and the creek damage, having trees that were burned, maybe still alive, but not a lot of foliage, not a lot of ground cover to prevent rocks from rolling down in the event of mudslides, and the potential for the creeks to clog up and cause flooding and sedimentation downstream. One of the first things we did soon after the fire, and I would like to point out that the work effort at Parma Park has been a collaborative effort of park staff, creek staff, public works staff, county flood control district. We all sort of rolled up our sleeves and went out there and had to take care of business fairly quickly. Our parks and forestry staff were there for a number of days, removing brush, taking out trees, anything within the creeks around the Stanwood Drive entrance that had the potential to head downstream, cause flooding on Stanwood Drive, and even further downstream impacts to the properties that were either burned as a result of the fire or saved. And that was one of the things that we had to be sure that we tried to mitigate to the extent possible. There's still quite a bit more work to do at Parma Park on an ongoing basis, and that leads into our rehabilitation discussion. The other thing that was undertaken immediately after the fires, there's an old debris basin in Parma Park, and if you look at the map that I've given you, it's essentially between the Stanwood entrance, the middle watershed, and that debris basin was constructed after the 1978 fire, Sycamore Fire. It was designed to fill in, and that's exactly what it did. So what you're looking at in these photographs is the debris basin underneath 30 feet of soil and trees and willows. The bottom photograph is the overflow of that debris basin once it becomes full in the event of a storm, and it heads downstream into a culvert and underneath Stanwood Drive. The County Flood Control District moved forward with actually excavating this debris basin, hired a contractor, got the associated necessary permission from the city to do this, and spent, I believe, about a week to 10 days excavating it. I don't know if Mr. Escobar remembers how many truckloads of dirt and soil that were taken out, but I want to say on the order of 40 or more. This gives you a scale of the debris basin. This is one of our staff, I believe it's Mark Roush, standing above it, and you can see water in the bottom of it after a rain in December. And the lower, this pipe right here actually drops all the way down and ends up below here. So this is Stanwood Drive here, and all the way up above here is the height of the debris basin. This area is the overflow channel that we have. We're hoping, and certainly the County Flood Control District's intending, that by reconstructing this debris basin in a section of the park where we really have little opportunity to slow anything down until the vegetation regrows, it will prevent damage to Stanwood Drive and Sycamore Creek.
And this happened right away, too. That was what surprised me, is how quickly all the agencies were able to cooperate and move forward. Wasn't that within the first week and a half?
Yes, Commissioner Longstreet and commissioners, no sooner had the fire stopped smoking, and in some cases it hadn't. There were still a number of hot spots in Parma Park, and actually we had fire crews in there for a number of days dealing with hot spots. We went into flood emergency planning and action. At the time, there was a forecast for fairly significant rainfall, and a lot of concern from all of the agencies of the potential impact. We continue to have those concerns. Luckily, the rain that we've had to date hasn't caused extensive damage. There have been mudslides in different parts of the fire area, and what we're hoping ultimately is enough vegetation will get re-established that it will mitigate future landslides. Although, as I said earlier, it's an area of very steep slopes and known landslide failure. It is just above Conejo Road, and so it's in an area of the city where that is bound to occur, and so we're trying to mitigate it wherever we can. Another activity that was undertaken almost immediately was the installation of a debris rack. The Stanwood entrance is right alongside Sycamore Creek, and on your map, if you look at the watershed to the left portion of the park, that's the area that we're talking about. The far left and then the middle watershed, all of that watershed drains into this section of creek and heads downstream to Sycamore Creek. And as we all know, under significant rain events, the Sycamore watershed is very steep, very short, and very flashy. And when you've lost a lot of vegetation, the ability for trees and rocks to move grows exponentially. The concept behind this debris rack is that it will capture large items and hopefully prevent them from heading further downstream, prevent them from impacting the bridge that crosses Sycamore Creek, which is a bridge that's owned and maintained by Caltrans, and then obviously any further downstream impacts. This was undertaken by the Public Works Department, and again, it went in, I believe, in about 5 or 6 days after the initial planning was done. It's intended to come out eventually. It's only supposed to be there for 5 years. It is a structure that, in a perfect world, we wouldn't have in a creek. However, given the safety concerns that there are, it's something that was determined needed to be there in the short term. This gives you a sense of its location. That's the bridge that crosses Sycamore Creek at the Stanwood entrance. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, and your staff report has more detail, since the beginning of the year, we've been working on coming up with a work plan for a detailed assessment of the damage. We've had park staff, Mr. Escobar has been involved, Randy Fritz, our street tree inspector, Kathy Fry, our park planner, has been assigned as the project manager to really put together the plan, move forward, and implement it. Our first and foremost goal is to open the park. It's currently still closed, so we have to reinstall signage on a regular basis because there are safety items that we haven't had an opportunity to undertake. We have been working with FEMA to identify what actions are covered since the area is determined a federal emergency area. Mr. Escobar's worked extensively with FEMA. Your staff report outlines that we could be reimbursed for almost $200,000 worth of work there. We're fairly confident that the immediate emergency response is something that we'll get reimbursed for. Other action items, removal of fencing, barbed wire fencing that we didn't know existed, except now we have no vegetation, we can see it. We have a number of trees that need to be assessed and determined for their safety, and do they need to be removed. Trails work, The list is quite extensive. And then we also have our concern about ongoing erosion. And we spend a lot of time, and I've neglected to mention that we also mulched about 36 acres of the park in an attempt to try to keep soil in place, and actually believe it probably has worked, primarily because we haven't had a whole lot of rain. It's one of those situations where you hope you don't have a lot of rain so that it can work. But there are other areas where we should be doing extensive erosion control measures. And then move forward with implementing a short-term action plan related to forestry again. Looking at the existing trees, what can be salvaged, what need to come out. There's an olive grove on the property that was severely damaged. It serves as its own sort of cultural resource for the property, and the Parma Park trustee would like to try to salvage and replant it. So Kathy Fry has been working with an olive tree expert to determine what we could do in that area. We've also looked at actually salvaging some of that wood for reuse at the park and park signage and park benches. One of the things that happens after a significant fire is vegetation does come back, but the exotic species come back faster than the native species do. And we've had a long-term goal of exotic species eradication there, and now's the time to jump on that and move forward with it. And then trails maintenance, as I mentioned earlier, we have an opportunity to not only address trail maintenance issues, and to some extent, or to a large extent, it's related to erosion, since there's no vegetation, but also to perhaps look at our trails in a more sustainable manner, so that they require less maintenance over time. The last thing that we've been working with, and Santos and I were in a meeting earlier today, is trying to acquire some federal grant funding that is labor-related, where we would be able to hire recently unemployed individuals to work for probably up to 6 months at Parma Park, providing assistance with rehabilitation and restoration area efforts. And it looks like that we may actually be eligible for that funding. Put in a grant proposal about 3 weeks ago for $150,000, which essentially would hire people who lost their jobs as a result of the Tea Fire or are recently unemployed. We'd be working with the one-stop shop of the Employment Development Department. The grant would be managed through the County of Santa Barbara Workforce Investment Board. But we would be able to potentially hire 4-person crews over an 18-month period, each 6 months each, because the stipulation of the grant funds is they can only earn up to $12,000. So that's about 6 months worth of work. And we would be able to actually complete a lot of this work as part of a Getting People Back to Work program as well. We're hoping that that will further develop. We'll know more in the next month or two, and we'll augment funding from both FEMA and the Parma Trust. In fact, if anything, we would be able to save some of that Parma Trust funding for longer-term restoration. And this slide gives you some of the information that we know to date related to our estimate of how much we'll request for reimbursement, what we've asked the Parma Trust to consider towards maintenance and restoration, and our maintenance account has over $190,000 in it, and then the National Emergency Grant Funds for Jobs. and at the time that this slide was prepared, I thought it was 50 to 150. It's going to be closer to $150,000 that will employ people to work at the park. This is the kind of the good news. Last slide. This shows you that despite the fire, we are getting new vegetation. Trees are coming back. Soon after the fire, we even heard birds. So there is some reclamation of lost territory, and it always gives us hope that we'll actually be able to do something really fantastic with this property. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Zachary. Are there questions for Ms. Zachary? Mr. Burns, did you?
What's a good estimate of when the park might be open to the public?
excuse me, Chair Longstreet, Commissioner Burns, I think I heard what you asked, and that is, do we know when the park might be open to the public? We're hoping within the next month to 6 weeks we'll be able to open the park to the public. One of the things that we've done over the last couple of weeks, and I'd like to extend, my kudos to park staff. They've been really trying to put pen to paper and figure out what are the key things we have to do so that we know that when we open it, it's a safe place for people to go. We need to actually get some help in the park to do some of that work. And it's our goal that we would have it open, certainly as the warm weather returns and the dry weather returns, so that people can return there.
Thank you, Chair Longstreet. Ms. Zachary. First, I want to just commend all of the efforts that came to the ready when the T-fire happened on all counts, and specifically here for Parma Park. As my involvement on the Creeks Committee as chair during the time that the fire happened, I was in contact with Mr. Benson right at the time, and I know that, the city and funding was coming quickly, and I think it really helped. The question that I have specifically is on the budget slide and some of the information in our report, and mainly not about this project itself, but just the funding from the trust and the maintenance account. So we've got $190,000 in the Parma Park maintenance account. That is funded by the trust. And how often do they fund, and how much? Is it annually? Is this a big amount or a small amount in this account right now?
Chair Longstreet, Commissioner Hochman, the Parma Trust provides funding generally on an annual basis. And each year we develop a work program which has a cost estimate for implementation. Generally speaking, we get about that amount of money in order to implement the work plan. As with other projects and programs, there's often money left over, funding that hasn't been spent at the end of the year. The Parma Trust funds are housed in a special grant fund within the general fund, so that money rolls over from year to year. On an annual basis, depending on the type of work we're doing, we may spend somewhere between $50,000 and $85,000 at the park. Most of it's focused on vegetative fuels, removing dangerous trees, trail maintenance. We have been working on some special projects related to exotics removal, signage, that kind of thing. And that adds a certain amount of expense on an annual basis. The Parma Trust did recently provide us with $85,000 in December. Part of the disbursement depends on what the trust needs to do. And that gets placed in the special account, and it only gets spent once we've determined with the trustee what we will spend that funding on.
Okay, the follow-up then is there's a request, I guess, that we're asking the trustee to be able to use $212,000 over the next 18 months towards this particular effort. So I guess my two questions in that, would that be, are the efforts that are going on in the next 18 months probably replacing anything that had been on the plans before the T-fire? And this 212 that's there, is that in addition to the 190 that's already in our maintenance account, or am I misunderstanding something?
Chair Longstreet, Commissioner Hochman, when we put together the budget, the total cost for the work that we would have done, so it includes both the immediate response emergency money, rehabilitation and rehab, totaled $416,000 and so on. We determined through what we believe FEMA will reimburse us is that a good portion of that cost can be carried by FEMA. We provided the trustee with the total cost, including the FEMA estimate, so that the trustee could determine whether the funding that we currently have in the account, the $193, could be used towards this. we conceptually have agreed to that. We've spent over the last month a lot of time coming up with some more details, and so we forwarded that to the trustee last week.
Great, thank you.
If I could, Commissioner Longstreet, I neglected to mention, and the Commission had an excellent presentation from Kathy Fry, I believe in October, regarding the Parma-Stanwood Entrance Capital Project. We, in consultation with the trustee, have determined we need to delay that project, probably for a couple of years. And for the new commissioners, that included regrading the driveway. That area serves as the staging area for equestrians that use the park. Regrading that area, relocating horse ties, putting in handicap access, place for people to get on their horses, a picnic area, making improvements to the entrance in terms of the fence and the gate and that kind of thing. We've determined it would be wise to put it off for a little while because we don't know how that area of the park will change if we do have significant storms. So once we see what goes on over the next 12 to 18 months, we'll be able to reschedule that. The funding for that project is also provided by the Parma Trust, and that's kept in a separate account for that project, and it will remain there until we move forward with that project.
Refresh my memory on the usage of Parma Park. It's open space, equestrian and hiking, no wheeled vehicles at all, correct?
Commissioner Longstreet, bicycles are allowed in the park, but only on the fire roads.
As you move forward, I'm just thinking of all of our front country trails groups. Is this going to be an area where we may be doing trail building in collaboration with some of the usage groups? And
Commissioner Longstreet, it's an excellent question. We were out there, I believe, in late January with a demonstration of using a mule to do trail work. And it occurred to me at that time that it could be a great place for the different user groups to come together and do some sustainable trail building, primarily because it's not going to change. We have within our agreement with the trust that we won't allow bicycles on the trails, but it gives us sort of a neutral territory to try out some sustainable trail building techniques where there isn't significant ownership over this trail or that trail. And for the Commission's benefit, as you know, we have about 7 main front country trails, and some are more dearly loved by mountain bikers, and some are more dearly loved by hikers, and sometimes the two don't mix as well as we would like them to. So Parma, because you're only allowed to bike on the fire road, it's kind of neutral territory for the different interest groups to work together. And that may be something we're able to pursue.
And just looking at your last slide, I mean, how quickly it's come back, if you think about it, really, that our foothill areas here were meant to burn. I mean, we live there now and we don't want them to burn, but over the hundreds of years, this is sort of how they've renewed themselves and gotten rid of overgrowth and everything. So, you know, it really, the park itself looks beautiful from that picture.
Chair Longstreet and Commission, I think also there's been a tremendous community response to all of the people who were affected by the Tea Fire, and it was actually very heartwarming to have people in the community, particularly those for whom Parma Park is their backyard, who contacted us, who said, when you're ready, we want to be part of the replanting. We want to be part of helping to bring our neighborhood park back. And so that was a really nice thing to experience from more than one person living in that immediate area. And we look forward to involving our neighbors and the community in projects that help to restore the park as well.
Thank you very much. That was an excellent report. And now we move on to Shoreline Park. another much-loved area of our community.
Chair Longstreet and members of the commission, I believe Ms. McGill has handed out an outline that was put together for the Mesa Neighborhood Association meeting, and thanks to Commissioner Burns for coming to that meeting. It was quite a turnout. I believe there were probably around 50, maybe 60 people there, and I participated in a panel on environment and sustainability, and had two other speakers, Owen Dell and Estelle Foster. And the majority of my remarks related to the city's efforts to identify sort of the geological issues associated with the landslide, mostly, primarily I should say, to determine how much further the slide might encroach within the park. And then also, once we started really looking at it, thinking longer term, where might we be in 10 or 20 years? And should we be looking at other sections of the park? And if we're reinstalling fencing and rebuilding sidewalks, the question was, should we be planning for other areas of the park now as well? The goal was to feed into a fairly significant renovation capital project for Shoreline Park. Shoreline Park was built in 1967, and since that time, and if you look at the original plans and then you look at what we have on the ground today, it's changed rather substantially. For example, if you're familiar with Ledbetter Point, there actually used to be a large picnic area. The point extended far further out than it does today. If you walk up the park going west, there's another picnic area that I believe in the late 70s eroded as a result of a landslide. During recent storms in 95, 98, we had landslide problems, and then of course last year in January we had a fairly significant landslide in the area between the steps that go down to the beach and the lower restroom. So, and if one walks along the beach, and the commission may want to do a site visit, if you'd like to, we could try to schedule that. You can see all the areas of the cliff that have eroded over time. And the purpose of the geology study was to determine, given the extent of this landslide, will it travel further into the park? We were concerned about the restroom, which is adjacent to the landslide, because it's quite close to the cliff area. And then we were also concerned, once we spent some more time really investigating the cliff areas of the park, of McGilvery Point, which is the lookout point near the children's playground. So it has a low stone wall and a couple of picnic tables, and really a wonderful place to be in the park. There's very little cliff around that stone wall anymore, and so we asked the geologist to look at that area. And then Ledbetter Point is an area that's very popular during high surf and beautiful summer days. Everybody's up there checking things out, and there has been some significant erosion. So the consultant has given us 3 draft reports with maps, and they haven't been finalized. Once they are, they'll be available. And essentially, the landslide itself is about 120 feet wide and 60 feet long. And over time, the landslides continue to move down into the beach as wave erosion has undercut the toe of the slide and more of the material has fallen down. He determined that there's actually a second landslide occurring to the east of the larger landslide, and that while it's in the initial stages of formation, it doesn't pose an immediate risk to the restroom, which is a concern that we have. Yet underneath that slide, there are a number of sea caves. So if you can imagine, if you're at the beach level, deep sea caves going into the cliff and unsupported bedrock, over time, we may see a whole area actually collapse. And at that point, we would have concern about the restroom. It's hard to know when these things would happen. His recommendation, draft recommendation, is that something that we just monitor for now. So that's good news. But it as part of our long-range plan for Shoreline Park, something that perhaps needs to be on the list of determining how and when to relocate that restroom. The other thing we asked the geologist to do is to predict the probable future top of slope, so that when we do spend our limited resources to install new fencing and new sidewalks, that we do it within the realm of where it might stay for a few decades, preferably 3 decades. And so in the case of the landslide, his estimate is that the top of that slope could actually be 20 to 23 feet further into the park eventually. So one of the discussions that we'll be having as we move forward with planning for the park is, okay, if that's the case, where would we put the fence, knowing that over time we might need to move it again? And there are different issues, park use issues, that would be discussed associated with that. McGilvery Point, and I reviewed the original plans for the point and what it looks like today, and by looking at those you can see how much of the cliff has eroded slowly over time. Currently, his recommendation is that we look very seriously about doing something different with the point. There are cracks in the wall, and those cracks correspond to where, at some point in the future, and that's the challenge, when we could actually lose that section of the cliff, and that it could be sudden. So some of the things, as you will see in the outline that you have, is some of the options, and this is just the preliminary results. These are just discussion really hasn't occurred. It's really sort of a status, and certainly something we'll be coming back to the Commission for much more discussion as we move forward. Closing the lookout indefinitely, demolishing it and rebuilding it. It does have a tribute to Mayor McGilvery. Closing the lookout during wet weather and monitoring the cracks. I do have a member of the public that's volunteered to do that. Determine how much is it moving. The cracks have been there for some time. It didn't happen overnight. And based on that monitoring, determine whether we would seasonally open the point. Those are the things we need to look more carefully at and have a discussion about what's the best approach for the park. And similarly with the landslide, the estimate is that the top of slope there will eventually be 17 to 23 feet from where it is today. The geologist's findings are essentially that there is unsupported bedrock at the cliff, and that essentially contributes to landslide movement. We have what's called, a marine terrace layer above the bedrock, and underneath that layer there's both soft and hard layers of bedrock that, depending on what happens, whether it's rainfall, whether it's land movement from a fault, whether it could be a future earthquake, that bedrock moves and provides fractures in areas where water can get in and undermine it. And then obviously we have the sea erosion. During high tide, especially during storms and certainly during the winter weather, tides come right up to the cliff and are undercutting the toe of that cliff on a regular basis. When that happens, then what's above it is unsupported, and that's how we get those landslides. Ledbetter Point, as I mentioned earlier, we have some earlier landslides, and the geologist, through his analysis, believes they're continuing to move. We have a couple of areas where the fencing is fairly close to the cliff edge, and probably should, at a minimum, replace that fencing, because it needs to be replaced. Probable future top of slope could be as much as 36 feet from where it is today. Again, it's all under the caveat as we're not quite sure when. It's a matter of trying to plan over the long term, make decisions in the short term, and then plan over the long term. Also, at the meeting last week, talked a little bit about groundwater, because that's an issue that's come up from the public. Is it irrigation from the park? Is it groundwater, stormwater? What's contributing to the landslides? And there's any number of those factors that could be contributing to the landslides. Is it the sole source? Not likely. Is it a major source? It's difficult to know. We do know the Mesa watershed that drains to Shoreline Park is 421 acres. So some of that water does pass into storm drains, and those storm drains do outlet at the cliff at Shoreline Park, and actually those storm drains do need to be assessed and replaced. And then to what extent is there actually subsurface flow? Because we know not all rainfall ends up in a pipe. It does end up in soil, and how far does it travel down in bedrock, and then how does that water migrate? Does it migrate all the way to the cliff and contribute to erosion? We are looking at and recommending that we both assess the storm drains, and those are the public street storm drains that pass underneath the park. And then there's a number of drains within the park, 4 and 6 inch drains or 6 and 8 inch drains that connect to those street storm drains, so that we are taking some of the water, either rainfall or irrigation, and directing it to the storm drains. I would ask that Mr. Escobar talk about our irrigation, because that's a question that always comes up. And at the time of the slide, we didn't have any irrigation on. It was January, and there's actually no storm drains in the vicinity of this landslide. So it could be contributing to something happening somewhere in the cliff, but did it contribute to this particular landslide? It doesn't appear that that's the case. So at the bottom of the outline, it talks about proposed improvements. At a minimum, we're looking at replacing the bluff top fencing, installing new sidewalk in the area where there isn't sidewalk, looking at the storm drain lines, and then tackling McGilvery Point, and understand that there'll be a lot of discussion about the best option there. There are other electrical and irrigation repairs that can be made. In our grand plan, we would look at other parts of the park, renovating the group picnic area, doing some work around the playground. And those are a little bit lower in the list, and our focus is more on safety at this point, given the best place to use finite resources. And we'll be working over the next couple of months on more details related to cost estimate and additional recommendations for moving forward with Shoreline Park. We have committed to having another public meeting because, as Ms. Rapp said, there are many, 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 many stakeholders at Shoreline Park, and for good reason. It's a wonderful place. And then also updating the City Council later in March as to the status of what's going on. And with that, I'd entertain any questions. And Mr. Escobar manages that park, so he's a wealth of knowledge about everything that goes on there.
I had one quick question. With that too, as well, like you said, how it's breaking down. Does that including the steps as well? Was that the steps won't be repaired, or are you gonna take the steps out?
I'm sorry. The step.
Yeah, the stairs.
The steps at the park?
Yeah.
The steps at the park are fine.
Okay.
That's good news.
And just so I can add, the steps are basically brand new. So if you haven't had a chance to go through and use them, you ought to go down and have a look, because it's just a beautiful set of staircases, that, we're blessed that nothing's gone wrong with them. It was a nice job when we worked with Public Works and had those installed. So very nice construction.
And initially, the stairs were closed because we were more concerned about landslide debris in an adjacent area. And then, people going down onto the beach where there was the potential of debris falling. So the stairs were never really, at our initial survey of the landslide, we really didn't have concerns about the safety of the stairs. And just also on that point, in terms of what people's perception is, I know that that there were some news media reports that the restroom was cracking and might be closed, and that was kind of news to us. And in fact, the restroom is not showing any signs of cracking, and we'll continue to monitor that. And yes, the survey shows that there is potential concern for more land movement in that area, but there is no danger currently that we have been able to observe.
Excellent. Rumors travel fast. Mr. Burns.
Yes, at the community meeting, one of the questions was on watering, and Santos, you gave a very good explanation. You might want to explain why the city, we really don't water from, what, 3 or 4 months out of the year?
Chair Longstreet, Commissioner Burns, Commissioners, in regards to our watering practices throughout the city, we have what's known as central control irrigation, okay? And what we have in our shop is actually a computer that monitors our water use at 20 of our park sites, Shoreline Park being one of those sites. At Shoreline Park, we water with what's known as recycled water. We get that water from Alistero treatment plant, okay? And so when we're watering also, just for everybody can understand what we're trying to do, we're always trying to conserve water. And just so you realize, with our state drought, we continue to conserve. And if you look at the plant's need, and we go through and look at, and hopefully I'm not going to be too technical with you on this, but in regards to a term called evapotranspiration, that's the amount of water that a plant goes through and uses and takes up, okay? And if you looked at a plant and you stated you needed 100% of water in order to go through and sustain its life, we actually water at 60% of that amount. So we go through and water minimally at these parks, and they still keep green and they're lush and beautiful. And that's throughout an entire park system. And a lot of the reason why we do that is because we have also a limited water budget as well that I manage with Mrs. Zachary. And so we're always watching our nickels and dimes. And so we have to be very careful on how much water we truly use. So, and another item that is important to realize too is the turf varieties that are in our park system. The majority of our park turf is what would be called warm season grasses, such as Bermudas and Kikuyu turf. And the Kikuyu turf that's at Shoreline Park doesn't really need to have a lot of water in order to sustain itself. So we're always on that cutting edge of sustainability as well. So,
Thank you. Other questions? I would just say, Mother Nature usually wins, and I think this is one of those cases. We always want there to be some reason somebody did something, but sometimes geology just marches on. So, other questions? Or thank you. That was very informative and exactly what I think we asked for a couple last month. So thanks. Well, that brings us to the end of our agenda. So I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second. All in favor?
Yep.
Aye. Opposed? We will see you next month.